Start whenever you are.
Okay, is Councilor Block on, Kerry?
She is in the gallery as well as Councilor Braden. So those are the first two.
Okay, excellent. All right, thank you, Kerry.
No problem. And I hear that the link has circulated pretty far and wide, so we'll have to be on top of having folks raise the blue hand to know whether or not we're going to have them, they're going to testify, but we'll cross that road when we get to it, public testimony.
Okay, Kerry, are you sharing the screen? I can just see the city council chamber area, basically.
Yep. I'll clear that once we're ready to gavel and go.
Oh, okay, I'm going to gavel us in, okay?
Sounds good.
Good morning. My name is City Councilor Ed Flynn. Welcome. I'm the chair of the City Council Committee on City and Neighborhood Services. In accordance with the Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 executive order, certain requirements of the open meeting law in relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibility while adhering to public health recommendations and ensuring public access to its deliberation through adequate alternative means. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed on boston.gov/citycouncil-TV. It will be rebroadcast at a later date on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and FiOS 964. Anyone that would like to testify on this matter, you can also email juan.lopez@boston.gov for the Zoom link. Today's hearing is on docket 0161, order for a hearing to discuss electronic billboards in the city of Boston. This matter is sponsored by myself and City Councilor Kenzie Bach and was referred to the Committee on City and Neighborhood Services on January 13th, 2021. At this time, I am joined by Councilor Bach, who is the co-sponsor, along with Councilor Liz Braden. I will first let my colleagues offer opening statements, then I'll provide an opening statement, then hand it over to the panelists from the city. After that, I will let my colleagues offer questions and comments, and then hand it over to the community panelists, then call for public testimony. I know there's a lot of public testimony, so if you're able to raise your blue hand, we'll get to as many comments as we possibly can. Thank you. So we have invited the City of Boston officials this morning with us, including Mark McGonigal from the BPDA, Edward McGuire from Office of Neighborhood Services, and Chris English from Inspectional Services. We may have others testifying as well. We also have a community advocate panel, including Ford Cavalieri from ADCO, Linda C., who's a Chinatown and Leather District resident, and Rachel Thurlow from Beacon Hill. At this time, I would like to ask my colleagues to provide brief opening statements, including the co-sponsor, Councilor Kenzie Bach. Councilor Bach.
Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn, and thank you for your leadership on this. And I really want to thank all the community advocates who are here today. This is something that we've heard about loud and clear across our neighborhoods. And I think it's an issue operating on several levels, and I hope that we're going to get into all those levels today. So, I'm concerned about electronic billboards for the impact on pedestrian safety, of the distracting aspect of them, for the impact on the historic fabric of our neighborhoods, and kind of, what we think about as the cityscape that we know and love. And also, I feel strongly that we are in a world where we spend all of our time looking at screens. Certainly we're doing that today. And I think that, retaining in our public spaces some respite from those screens is important to me. And I think that we shouldn't just immediately go to monetize every corner of public space with a screen, and particularly because of how these are able to kind of pursue people's attention. I feel more and more like we're in an attention economy where sort of people themselves are the products. And I don't think that the proliferation of electronic billboards help with pushing back against that. So that's a kind of, an issue about the billboards themselves. I think we're also confronting several major process issues. I mean, a core one is our neighborhoods are really trying to understand how to make a forbidden use actually forbidden. Because in most of our neighborhoods, that's what these are. And yet again and again, we see the risk of them being approved. And I think that that's very frustrating for people in terms of legitimate expectations based on our legal code. And I think that it forces our neighbors to spend a lot of time in a kind of game of whack-a-mole at the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I don't think that that's a good use of anybody's time. And I don't think it's how government's meant to work. So I'm really interested in how we get a handle on that, on really like recognizing if we have a public policy desire to not have these, how to make that effective, and how to give our neighbors predictability on that front. So again, just really want to thank all the community advocates who have really brought this attention to the fore, and Councillor Flynn for partnering with me and really leading the way on holding this hearing today. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Councillor Braden?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Councillor Flynn, and thank you, Councillor Bach. I'm excited to have this hearing this morning because the billboard issue bubbles up to the surface in our district here in Alston, Brighton, and fairly regularly. And I agree with Councillor Bach that the billboards are a forbidden use, and yet we have persistent attempts to override the zoning to place them in our neighbourhoods. And the big issue along in Alston and North Brighton along the Pike is that in that area is being developed now, a much more residential neighbourhood, whereas in the past it was much more industrial. And we still have this persistent attempts to place large digital billboards in the vicinity of new residential development. And I feel also that along the Pike that to the point of distraction, and the issue of distraction for drivers is one issue, but also there's a huge issue with light pollution. These billboards are so huge you can read them from about 2 miles away. So I feel it's an impact on the quality of life in our neighbourhoods, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. We're also joined by at-large City Councilor Julia Mejia. Councillor Mejia, would you like to give an opening statement?
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Flynn and Councillor Bach, for bringing this to our attention. I just kind of wanted to give us an opportunity to center the voices of the community and how they interact with their neighborhoods, especially those who are trying to come into the space. Oftentimes decisions such as where to place electronic billboards are being made for them, not with them. So I think that that is a very important part of the conversation. And I think if we have a chance to change the way that this process works and do it in a way that benefits the community, then this is what we should be focusing on. And I look forward to this conversation. Having lived in New York for a hot second, Times Square, I worked right in the dead smack in the middle of Times Square in my time at MTV, and there was not a space that was not occupied by a billboard. And I think that to Councillor Bach's point in terms of just the consumption, I think that we are being, I don't want to see us become a mini Times Square ever. So really looking forward to this conversation and centering it around the needs of the community. Thank you, Councillor Flynn, for bringing it to the table, and Councillor Bach for hosting it.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. We're joined by Councillor Anissa Sabi-George. Councillor Sabi-George, would you like to provide opening statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having today's hearing. I don't have a long opening statement, perhaps just to say, ditto to what my colleague said, I'm sorry for tuning in late, so I don't want to be repetitive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Sabi George. We're going to go right into administration testimony. I also know Jeffrey Hampton, who's the Executive Secretary of the Zoning Commission, is also with us this morning. Thank you, Jeff. It's good to be with you. I'm not going to provide my opening statement. I'm going to go right into the testimony of the administration. As I mentioned, Mark McGonigal from BPDA, Edward McGuire from Office of Neighborhood Services, Chris English, Inspectional Services, Jeffrey Hampton, as I mentioned, from the Zoning Commission. I've worked with all four of these individuals over the last several years. They do excellent professional work for the residents of the city of Boston. Just want to highlight that first. Having said that, is there an order you guys would like to start maybe with your opening statement? Ed McGuire.
Thank you very much, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Bach, and the other councilors for joining us today. We look forward to answering as many questions as possible. My name's Edward McGuire. I'm the Director of the Office of Neighborhood Services. We facilitate the public abutters process for every appeal at the Zoning Board of Appeals. That also includes electronic billboards, and we participate in those public processes along with the other elected officials in the areas in which they're proposed. I'm here with my colleagues, Chris English, who is the Chief of Staff of the Inspectional Services Department, who can highlight kind of just what that process is to submit, plans and or go through the rejection process of submitting an application for forbidden use, as well as Mark McGonigal, who works for the BPDA Planning and Development Agency that deals primarily with public outreach related to planning and zoning. And we hope we can answer as many questions as possible, as I stated, and kind of discuss what it is. I will stick primarily to the public process that we conduct, and then any other questions that you have. If we do not necessarily have the answer today, we will find that information and get it to you as soon as possible. So thank you very much for having us, and we look forward to having this dialogue.
Thank you, Ed. Either Mark or
Yep.
Chris want to ask if you guys want to
Sure.
weigh in.
I can jump in, Councilor. Thank you very much. Mark McGonigal. Good morning, Chairman Flynn and members of the Boston City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to address today's hearing, and thank you to the members of the public who have taken the time to attend and provide comment. My name is Mark McGonigal, and I work at the Boston Planning and Development Agency in the Community Engagement Office. One of my roles, as Eddie McGuire mentioned, for the agency is overseeing BPDA's involvement in electronic signage, particularly assisting approved applications for electronic signage through the BPDA's design review process, license agreements, as well as guiding the community engagement processes for proposed zoning changes regarding electronic signage. The BPDA's overall role in electronic signage are creating and amending applicable zoning laws, making recommendations to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and ensuring compliance of our license agreements. Section 11-7 of the Boston Zoning Code, which governs electronic signs citywide, was created in 2007. This addition to the code created 3 small areas within Boston where electronic signage is conditional. Some of the councils have mentioned this already, but I wanted to put this on the record. In all other areas of the city, indeed, electronic signage is a forbidden use. Conditional provisions include restrictions on size, times of display, public service message requirements, as well as a requirement to enter into a license agreement with the BPDA. The 3 areas are Lansdowne Street by Fenway Park, the South Boston waterfront by the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center, and the Theater District downtown. Last year, the BPDA proposed 2 changes to 11-7 of the zoning code. The first would change the allowable time of operation of electronic signs from the current 7 a.m. to 2 a.m. to a proposed 6 a.m. to midnight. The second change would add the word variance alongside the current wording of conditional use in order to ensure compliance with the requirements of 11-7 of the code for signs approved by way of variance at the Zoning Board of Appeals. I personally ran the public engagement process for these changes, and while there was considerable support for the proposed time change, there was much concern that the addition of the word variance as proposed would loosen restrictions on electronic signage. While I can assure all members of the council here today that that is not the case, and members of the public, I also acknowledge, and we acknowledge, the need for further education and public engagement on the matter before we'd consider proceeding. These two amendments to the code passed the BPDA board back in March of 2020, but we have not proceeded to the Boston Zoning Commission for consideration of full adoption due to the aforementioned expressed community concern. As you mentioned, Council Flynn, I'm joined here today by my colleague at the BPDA, Jeff Hampton, who is our senior planner and executive secretary to the Boston Zoning Commission. We look forward to hearing additional testimony from members of the council as well as the public, and are happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much, Council, for the opportunity to provide an opening statement. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your comments. We're also joined by our colleague, City Councilor Frank Baker. Thank you, Councilor Baker. Chris English or Jeff Hampton, just want to see if you guys wanted to offer brief comments.
Thank you, Counselor. My name is Chris English. I am the Chief of Staff here at the Inspectional Services Department. Just wanted to give a brief overview of ISD's role in reviewing permit applications for electronic signage. Billboards are considered structures. So as with all buildings and structures, a long form permit application is required to either construct a new billboard or to make an alteration to an existing billboard. Those long form permits are assigned to a plans examiner for review, and those examiners review these applications for compliance with both the building code and the zoning code. In the case of billboards, the zoning code considers them either, as my colleagues have said, either conditional or forbidden. So a zoning code refusal would be issued, and that application would need to appeal to the Board of Appeal. The Board of Appeal's role here is really to hear the application for either a conditional use permit or a variance. As part of the ZBA process, there's a community process facilitated by Neighborhood Services, and then the hearing, which I know you guys are all very experienced with. But ultimately, once the ZBA makes a decision, if it's to issue the conditional use or the variance, ISD will then issue the permit and allow the project to proceed. If the case is denied at the Board of Appeal, that permit remains denied and we close it out. So I'll be here happy to answer any questions about ISD's role or ZBA process.
Thank you, Chris. Jeff Hampton.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Other members of the council, thank you for inviting me to collaborate in this meeting today. Mark spelled it out pretty clearly on what the proposed amendment is intended to do. It's not by any means trying to loosen or make it easier for anyone to obtain a variance before the Board of Appeals. I am also, not only am I the senior planner and the executive secretary of the Zoning Commission, I'm also the BPDA's liaison to the Board of Appeals. So I sit down there for hours on end and listen to every appeal. So, I am there when these billboards come forward. So I'm really here to answer any questions that you may have specifically to zoning, the zoning process, zoning commission. Like Chris English said, he can really address the issues before the Board of Appeal, but I'm down there for these hearings as well. So if you have any questions about zoning in general, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. At this time, we have a second panel, which is the Community Advocates panel, including Ford Cavalieri from ADCO, which is a citywide neighborhood organization, Linda C. from the Linda C. from the Chinatown Leather District area, and Rachel Thurlow from Beacon Hill. I know, Ford, you have a PowerPoint presentation, is that correct? I think you're on mute. I think you're on mute, Ford.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Yes, I do have one, and whenever you want me to do that, I will.
Okay, Kerry, can we tee up Ford to go directly to the PowerPoint presentation?
Ford, you should be all set to share screen now. Thank you.
Okay.
And immediately after Ford, we'll go into Linda and then to Rachel. Okay, Ford, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. And I know many folks that know me would be disappointed if I didn't have a presentation. So I'll try to make it relatively brief. And some of the comments that the city panel has made, particularly Mark McGonigal gave a really good review of some of the zoning laws that are on the books. So I will go through that quickly and sort of our interpretation of what's been happening. But we really think that there is a threat right now to Boston neighborhoods. The amount of billboard applications to the ZBA has gone way up since 2012. And in the last couple of years, particularly during the COVID period, there's been just a startling number of folks who are trying to move these edifices forward. And there's been sort of more of a brazen belief that you can now put them right in the center of neighborhoods, as opposed to what we had been used to from 2012 to about 2 years ago, which was just, seeing the natural desire of the roadside billboards on some of our interstates to be converted, which we do not approve, because many of those roadside areas are residential neighborhoods. Just ask the Port Norfolk and Columbia Savin Hill resident associations what they feel about the Boston Bowl billboard, which was just recently approved by the ZBA. Again, one of these COVID hearings, virtual hearings. So we're quite troubled. But we're also excited that we're having this discussion. I really want to thank everyone, the city folks from the BPDA who are here, the folks, certainly the city council, and you, Ed and Kenzie, for starting, saying that we should have this hearing. So we're going to give our observations. We're also going to come up with some suggested solutions that maybe we could get some discussion on. But as Mark told us, we benefited in Boston by a 2007 amendment to Article 11, the zoning sign section. Article 11, Section 7 said electronic billboards are really going to be strongly curtailed, yet that's really not happening. And we think they should be, because billboards have a lot of bad spillover effects to the neighborhoods. We think that interpretation of the law actually has gotten weaker, and we disagree that the amendments offered to Section 11.7 would not weaken. We think they would weaken Section 11.7. And Mark McGonigal and I have talked about this, and he understands we have this perspective. As he's mentioned, many folks, many neighborhood groups have this perspective. We don't think there's any intention of the BPDA to try to weaken this law necessarily. We are worried about unintended side effects, and we think that some of the wording changes could actually turn a spigot on for conversions of static billboards to electronic billboards. And these billboards are all across Boston, from Causeway Street down in the Bay Village area on Stewart Street, Dorchester Avenue. You have a huge amount of static billboards that we don't want to see converted. We also worry that there was some public process, as Mark says. There were 2 meetings, lightly attended meetings, on the Section 11-7 proposed amendment. But again, this whole thing was offered just as we were going into the COVID period. I know that some of the meetings which preceded that were pretty lightly attended. Mark points out the community pushed back on those points. We, in our subsequent discussions, have suggested that maybe we should re-examine the 11.7 amendments, because we should ask ourselves if maybe they should be a little tougher rather than a little looser. And the reason we're here, the reason we asked to give this presentation, is because there have been 4 recent zoning petitions, each of which sort of gets progressively worse and more brazen, that just have shocked us. First, as I mentioned, after 12 deferrals, this Boston Bowl billboard finally got approved when no opposition showed up. And I think Councilor Baker couldn't even get into the session because of a technical difficulty.
Yeah. I wanted to speak about that a little bit, Ford, and I will when I get my turn. Thank you.
Oh,
sorry to cut you off.
Thank you for jumping in. I appreciate that, because I think that just underscores the fact that there is a game that well-funded corporations can play at the ZBA, and that is that if you look at who's there, particularly if it's online, if you have a lot of opposition, you just defer, no penalty. As I mentioned, these guys did it 12 times. They actually did more than 12 times. They did it through deferring, withdrawing, resubmitting under a different number, deferring, withdrawing, or not showing up, and doing it again and again. You can do this forever, and there appears to be no penalty. So we were sort of shocked that happened. Then we saw the same kind of thing starting in Chinatown, where a more brazen center of community electronic billboard proposed at the corner of Beach and Harrison Avenue, right facing into apartment buildings, was proposed, deferred again, and it was withdrawn, but we expect that it's going to come back using the Boston Bowl Morrissey Boulevard roadmap that we've already seen put together. There's another petition from the same people trying to bring us the Chinatown billboard media vision for the Bullfinch Triangle, 55 Causeway Street, after the BPDA has put significant effort into converting that whole area into a really decent residential neighborhood. Are we really going to just put electronic billboards there and think that a variance at a ZBA hearing is a good enough process to go through? And finally, again, I'll mention the BPDA proposal of the Zoning Commission. We just are very uncomfortable. We're very pleased that the BPDA is holding it for now, but we'd like to see it changed. So let me I'm not going to go into all this detail, because I want to mention our website, adco.boston /billboards. You can find all of the stuff that I reference, all of the studies. And there are a lot of studies that have been done that show that billboards are unsafe, that if you put them near intersections, if you put them near ramps on highways, they significantly shift the perspective of the driver, and they also cause more accidents. 25% increases in crash rates downstream from electronic billboards influence areas, according to one study. Another study gives facts and figures about why you should never locate these electronic billboards with their rolling advertising and flashing near any place where there are complex driving conditions. And conditions that are likely to change rapidly. Pre-COVID, that was pretty much all of Boston, but certainly the downtown area. And now, we have to ask, with all this safety problem that we see regarding electronic billboards, well documented by numerous studies, not just these, many more. And with Boston having a Vision Zero safety process that we've started, really trying to make our streets safer, why the heck would we decide on the one hand we're going to make things safer, on the other hand we're going to actually put this stuff in that really mucks it up? The other situation that I wanted to point out that has been heavily studied is electronic billboards tend to depress property values and in the neighborhoods that they're put into. And they're also associated with a whole bunch of income inequality issues that I think merit some discussion, including the concentration of placement and the type of advertising, more booze, more fast food in vulnerable communities that are already, COVID rates are higher, largely because of higher obesity levels. And this is a driver. If you have essentially a captive community with flashing advertising saying eat more bad stuff, you'll have problems. So we want to show that, we've looked at studies. Again, the depression in home sales prices is documented. The two studies I want to point to that are on our website are really interesting in terms of the targeting, particularly obesity related. Nothing against obese people. Those of you who met me that know I'm in that category, but nonetheless, I don't want to be advertised to with fast food all the time. And I'm sure most people don't. And finally, you know, we just think, again, we've done Imagine Boston with guidelines that are sort of against creating blight, and yet we're doing it to Chinatown, and we're talking about doing it to Bullfinch Triangle. We're doing it to Dorchester, and I don't understand that. And we also want to point out that Boston Climate Action really argues against extra uses of electricity that we don't need. Electronic billboards consume massive amounts of electricity, not the best use of it. As Mark said, we do have these three districts, electronic sign districts, Lansdowne Street, Theater District, and BCEC. But a bit more than 1/10 of a square mile in total, 70 acres. These are the places where 11.7 says, this is where you have electronic billboards. Elsewhere, they're forbidden. Now, these are examples. Here's at the BCEC. You can see, those of you who've been there have seen the billboards. The Theater District, billboards, a bunch of them down there. This is one example at the W Hotel. And the Lansdowne billboards at each side, an electronic billboard. I just want to point out that life within these districts is pretty different from the typical residential neighborhood that you and your family probably want to live in. It's very affected by the light. Contrast levels on these billboards are incredibly glaring to the point where you could easily miss a traffic signal. So pedestrians have to be extra wary in these areas. And also the rightmost picture shows what it looks like when the billboard is on from inside an apartment. We heard Councilor Mejia talk about living near Times Square. This is what living near Times Square is. This is the hotel rooms at the W Times Square, where every one of them has billboard light just shining in, so you need heavy draw curtains to block it out. This is Las Vegas Strip kind of living. Will you get used to the light? You might probably move off the Strip instead. So we're concerned about this becoming normalized. And just this is within these three districts. This is an example from district, but really is life only changed in those districts? Because we've noticed that outside these zones, many electronic billboards have squeezed past zoning, including non-highway billboards. And I want to talk about how that's happened. The ZBA has let some through. I would note that the 2021 down at the bottom, the Boston Bowl, huge community opposition, somehow never discussed. ONS didn't bother to mention the level of community opposition, which is a problem too. The Alston billboards are interesting because there was a pretty complex mitigation done to the one near the Lantana building, or the Lantera rather. I know Councilor Braden is interested in this. This has been a particularly bad sort of, short-term rental violation area, but the billboard there, when the neighborhood associations negotiated mitigation, they wanted to get rid of a whole bunch of electronic billboards. They wanted to make sure that nonprofits got funded. 7 years after those agreements were reached, many of them are still unfulfilled. And this is something we also have to think about too. In the BPDA project development process, if you have a BPDA project manager and someone negotiates a mitigation, there is a project manager at the BPDA whose job it is to make sure you get those mitigations. Who's going after people for the mitigations here? Is it the ZBA? I don't think so. I mean, I've gone to many of the ZBA hearings that Jeff Hampton has been in, and I can see he's been in every one I've been in. I've been in too many of them because they go on forever, and they have to because there's just so much backlog. So we need to come up with a better process. The ZBA process is a little tough right now. I'll also point out for various reasons, there are a whole bunch of billboards that just go directly to the state. They skip the ZBA. They go right to the MassDOT Office of Outdoor Advertising, which is the MOOA cited here. And this from 93 North down to the Southeast Expressway, lots of examples of this. There are also a bunch of billboards that have popped up because they've somehow been they've been contained, they've been bundled into construction projects. I will note one, the PDA 78, negotiated by the BPDA and the Seaport project. If you read that, you'll see that it basically says, oh, there'll be an electronic billboard here, and it doesn't have to go through any approval process. It's just, it's already passed through the ZBA, don't bother. And I have a copy of that PDA excerpted here, which I'll show you. This is common, and one of the most egregious billboards is the one on North Station, TD Garden, which was the focus of a lot of scrutiny when it was just a regular billboard with a Budweiser advertisement on it. There were stories written in 2011 in the Globe about how there were negotiations to make it smaller because it was dangerous. And then all of a sudden, in post 2012, you have this huge billboard that pops up, and 2017, I think, is the date I have here. It may be a little earlier, and again, this happens a lot. And there's some billboards that have popped up. We don't know what happened. The East Boston billboard on the McClellan Highway heading into the airport and to the Callahan Tunnel. We don't know how that got authorized, and nor do the neighborhood associations seem to know. So anyhow, the TD Garden billboard that people note, all sorts of violations. I mean, why are there two billboards right, within 500 feet of one another, which is a violation of state law? We don't know that. How come on a 90-degree sort of turn, a really tight turn on the Leverett connector, that's a place you put a billboard? So it's a problem to us. We also have found that some of these buildings on public land that have seemed to have skipped right through the process have argued that, well, we're a good cause. We're the Boston Food Bank. We're built on the old Boston incinerator land. We'll do good things with the money. We'll take some of it and give it to charity. Well, I think they do great work at the Boston Food Bank. I commend them for doing that work. I think this is a very poor revenue generator for them, and we shouldn't allow revenue generation from something that is bad for the neighborhood. This is, again, the Alston billboards that I referenced that have not been delivering on concessions that they made. And this is the Seaport billboard, a picture of it. You can see it's next to the district hall. Very nice what's happened down there, but why an electronic billboard was thrown in as a gimme, I don't know. I wanted to just mention that ADCO on our website, and you have the link over here, we have created an interactive map to track all Boston billboards, whether they be electronic or not. You can see that there are a whole bunch of physical billboard frames. Only 29 of them are electronic right now. There are a whole bunch of billboard advertisements, about 30 spots. And because you have about 8 spots on an electronic frame, you'll see a lot higher concentration, 35%, approximately a third right now on electronic. These are the electronic billboards in Boston. You can see they're all over the place already. The other thing we need to mention is that on our streets, there are actually 40 smaller street furniture screens that somehow we got saddled with as well. We've all seen these non-electronic versions that are all over the neighborhood, but the electronic ones are really tough. There's an agreement that Boston has where 25% of the revenues come to the city. That cut is actually no better, or sort of at the lower end of the negotiation ranges of how much of the leaseholder would get of the revenue of a billboard in a commercial setting. So, we could do a better negotiation if we really want to do this. But my point is, why would we want to do this? If you've ever tried to drive down any of these streets that have these billboards in the evening, or particularly right around dusk, again, you have the same situation as the W Hotel. It's really hard to see the traffic signals. Why is this allowed? So, I want to point out our biggest worry about this, and that is that we think that billboard zoning enforcement is right now, as we speak, experiencing the death by 1,000 cuts. The first cut was a 2012 Corporation Council memo that basically said, if it's on public land, we're washing our hands of regulating it in the city of Boston. We don't think we have the authority, and that's by no means an agreed point. And so we're just not going to do it. And that started, you'll note after 2012, that's when we found a lot of these billboards pop up. Then the PDA that I mentioned that says, well, we can just build it into the project. So while the BPDA has been doing some really good things here and having some good community discussion, there's some bad things that are still in the vestiges of urban renewal, the PDAs, the U zones, where you can just get these things snuck across the goal line, and we need to eliminate these. And finally, the amendment that the BPDA wants for the zoning 11-7, we think that the addition of the word or variance, it sounds sort of trivial, or variance, big deal. But in a section that was contemplated to have no variances, like sort of modeled after the old combat zone adult entertainment district, a ring fence, so that if you're going to have a certain activity that people don't really like, and you've agreed that it has to happen, you're going to ring fence it tightly so it doesn't go outside a particular zone. That's what they tried to do here, and we should understand that was the whole point of Section 11-7. If you look at Cairo Shen's quotes in the Globe saying, we can't do the willy-nilly by exception process of the ZBA for billboards, electronic billboards. If you look at what Matt Weiser wrote in the Globe, he said it's specifically this, the intent was specifically to ban new electronic signs outside these three zones. So not like a forbidden use, like, the same kind of forbidden use as maybe, having the floor area ratio out of bounds, and you're converting something that is a first floor unit from retail to a residential, and it happens to be forbidden, and that's the kind of forbidden use where you can see the ZBA leaning in and saying, well, we'll grant an exception for these extraordinary problems, hardship that a landowner might show. You can't show a hardship if you're saying, I'm not getting enough millions of dollars from the unused electronic billboard space on the side of my building. This is a variance that should never be handed out by the definition of variance, and also by the construction of Section 11-7, which never has the word variance, because probably it didn't even cross the mind of anyone that you would think that this is a variance category. So we don't like putting the word or variance in here, because it says this is a variance category, and that's the big problem we have with this. And that's with other residents.
Ford,
Yeah.
could you take one more minute? We
Okay.
just want to get to the next, the other speakers. If you have one more minute.
Well,
to wrap up.
I do have my conclusion right here. So
Okay,
anyhow,
perfect.
there are three applications that we're very concerned about right now: Beach Street, Causeway Street, and the Pine Street Inn application. So I want to mention we're worried about that. We also see the Polish American Club down in the Polish Triangle potentially coming online too. We're very concerned that if any of this stuff goes through, then, I'll just talk about my neighborhood, but we can talk about Dorchester, we can talk about Bay Village, we can talk about other neighborhoods. You're going to see a lot of these static billboards turn into electronic billboards. And all these in the North End, we think, are at risk. So these are the conclusion slides. 5 concerns emerged from our discussions and working together. And we at ADCO, even though we're the 9 largest downtown resident associations, we've been working with Columbia Savin Hill. We've been working with Port Norfolk. We've been working with Alston Brighton. We've been working with Jeffreys Point neighborhood associations to try to get around this problem. And we're concerned that the billboard series the billboard industry is really serious about expansion. Electronic billboards generate 4 to 8 times the revenue of their static cousins from the industry. That's what they say. So we think that they're highly motivated to try to push. they've learned how to navigate and game our current regulations and restrictions. They know how to defer. They know how to creatively link even the most community impinging proposals like Chinatown to affordable housing, which they've done. And they're preying on ambiguities of law and jurisdiction. For the last several years, we're worried that Boston has appeared less than serious. No disrespect to folks here, because I think it's serious that we're all talking. But rather than doubling down on 11.7, we're actually muddling it a bit. We haven't had the will to regulate billboards on our own streets and our own city lands. And ONS seems to always be siding with the billboard guys for some reason. So I don't understand that. It's not really not the Office of Neighborhood Services if it's doing that. In allowing ambiguity persist also, we're weakening the ZBA and strengthening cases for appeal at Superior Court. And we know the well-funded corporate interests are going to go to Superior Court if we show any fracturing. So if we somehow capriciously decide this billboard is okay and this one isn't, they'll take it to court and they'll win. And finally, the electronic billboards don't help our communities. They degrade public safety, they implode property values, they increase blight. I'll let people go up to our website to pull this down to read all the subpoints. But I just want to take 20 seconds to get into the conclusions that we have and the idea that we would like to discuss. So we think 11.7 was great, and we should double down on it. We think that if we want to double down on it, why don't we require that any new electronic billboard in the city be in a electronic sign district? So if you, for instance, on Causeway Street, if they really want that billboard, I'm not saying that neighborhood does, in fact, I know they don't, but if they did, there should first be a process to designate a new electronic sign district, a deliberative process that would go to the zoning commission and have lots of public process prior to that. The BPDA would certainly be involved in this. And then once you've designated that zone, you go to the ZBA for the conditional use permit for that. And we think that there also concurrently, the ZBA should be told no more variances, none. I mean, whether it be through a corporate council opinion or a city council ordinance or other means, let's just say if it's forbidden, there will be no variances. You might say, well, how can you do that? This would be very similar to what the city did with the Addison Street opinion on executive suites. Executive suites are no longer given by the ZBA when they're applied. It's just automatic. It's an automatic denial until further notice. And we think that this is the kind of thing that we need to do with these variances until we have a process put in place that makes this a better process. So with that, thank you. Sorry I went a little long, but I appreciate your hearing some of these ideas. And any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ford. We have two other panelists from the community. We have Linda C. and Rachel Thurlow. Linda and Rachel, if you'd like to comment briefly. I know we're trying to get as much public testimony after this, but if there's some major point that you would like to leave us with, would welcome that opportunity to listen to you, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. Again, my name is Rachel Thurlow. I'm on the board of directors of the Beacon Hill Civic Association. For the past 10 to 12 to 15 years, I've been among a group of, residents, and I'm sure you'll find from other community members who are going to testify. We've basically become mini experts on billboard regulations as we've been forced to be completely vigilant on, again, these death by 1,000 cuts with all our billboard protections here. So Ford's presentation, I'm guessing, is not really, newsworthy. Billboards historically for the past 120 years have been universally known as light, as an intrusive and distracting, right? So Massachusetts and the city, for over 100 years, we've traditionally used billboard regulations as a means for economic competitive advantage by creating, a place in a city where people want to live, where they want to work, where they want to visit. That's always been good for us. And Massachusetts has long recognized the value of restricting billboards and regulating them to the point that the Massachusetts Constitution was amended in 1918 to specifically allow the banning and regulation of billboards. So we've had a long history of, restricting these things. And there's a lot of case law for the last 100 years that really promotes this. So I just wanted to point out just historically where we've been. And so it's a little disappointing to see kind of where we've been going over the last few years. And it always feels like we're, starting to live that Kenny Rogers chicken episode of Seinfeld. The second thing I wanted to point out is this proposed change to 11.7, an unintended effect of including that variance language. So when you're for getting a permit at the state with Mass DOT for outdoor advertising, to be eligible, there's a requirement that you conform and comply with the local municipal regulations to even be eligible. If you add that variance, an unintended impact, I think, will be that just about any non-conforming billboard would be eligible for conversion to electronic billboards. So I just want to point that out. And then lastly, I just want to point out for the 3 zones, electronic zones in Boston, when that was put together in 2007, just to point out that off-premise electronic billboards at that time were not allowed at the state level. So when those 3 zones were created, I think it's pretty easy to read that the intention of putting them in those 3 zones were to promote on-premise advertising for the theaters, for the convention center, and Fenway Park, right? They weren't meant at that point to be monetized or the public space monetized for outdoor advertising. Anyway, thank you for that, for this, and I look forward to the work we'll be doing, hopefully.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for testifying. Linda C., would you like to offer testimony?
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Councillor Flynn and Councillor Bach, for calling this hearing, and to all the councillors and city officials who are also here today. I'd just like to take a quick minute to talk about my experience fighting the billboard in Chinatown. My name is Linda C. I'm a member of the Chinatown Residents Association. I serve as their rep on the board of directors of the Greenway Conservancy, and most importantly, I'm a mother of 3 young children whose lives are deeply rooted here in Chinatown. Electronic billboards do not belong in a densely populated neighborhood like Chinatown, where public open space is already extremely limited. No one wants to live with a massive disruptive video billboard flashing into their windows for 19 hours a day, but many Chinatown residents simply don't have the financial mobility to leave a community that they rely on for access to critical resources and jobs. Chinatown especially is a really vulnerable population of primarily low-income immigrant families and elderly with limited English-speaking ability. How are they supposed to find out about these ZBA hearings after multiple deferrals, or be expected to take time off their jobs or helping our kids with remote learning to keep fighting these? Electronic billboards are supposed to be forbidden in Chinatown and almost everywhere else in the city by the zoning code, but the current process places a really unfair burden on the average resident to fight something that was never intended to be allowed in the first place, while these well-funded billboard operators essentially wage a war of attrition against entire communities. The time we need to spend trying to protect our neighborhoods from these predatory billboards and their operators is time that's taken away from dealing with other critical issues and challenges facing our residents. I also think it's important to note that any purported community benefits are grossly disproportionate to the long-term negative impacts to our neighborhoods and the significant quality of life issues that for our residents that these billboards would bring. Linking a billboard to an organization with good intentions doesn't justify making a neighborhood unlivable for everyone else around it. Communities should not be forced to accept something inherently bad for it just to get some kind of peripheral good. Thank you all for your time. I know I talked a lot about Chinatown today, but please remember this really affects the entire city and every resident. I thank you all again.
Thank you, Linda, for your testimony. We're also joined by at-large City Councilor Michael Flaherty as well. We have public testimony that we will go through, but I first wanted to give my colleagues a brief opportunity to ask questions. If you have any, if you don't, you can hold off. We can go into public testimony. I'm going to hold off on my questioning at this time, but I wanted to give my colleagues an opportunity to ask questions.
Councilor Flynn, I just have one, if I may just ask your indulgence. I just noticing like that you're starting to see, particularly around the South Boston waterfront and even other buildings in and around the downtown, where we're seeing where the sort of the largest tenant, if you will, gets to somehow get some air rights or gets to put their name across the top of the building. And I know we're sort of focused on billboards, but I think it's sort of part of the same discussion as to what that process is. And so you're starting to see where like the anchor tenant, for example, is getting carte blanche to put their name and their logo up on the the 30th floor, if you will, clearly visible all across the city with no community process. So I guess my question is really more towards the BPDA and or and even the community. What's the community process for that? I know that they may have bought the building and or built the building. Doesn't necessarily mean you get to put your name across the building. There needs to be some process. So I just want to add that. I don't want to take away from the great work that you've been doing here on the billboard stuff, but I think it's sort of part and parcel as to what the process is by which someone gets to plaster their name on the upper floors of some of these new buildings that are going up. But thank you, and I appreciate the courtesy, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Let me, before we get to that question and answer, let me start with Councilor Bach for questioning.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I have a couple of questions for the administration. So one is really, and this is directed to maybe both Chris English and Jeff Hampton. And I know, Jeff, you're not a lawyer for the Zoning Board of Appeals. You're on the Zoning Commission side, but you're at these meetings. And then Chris, obviously, ISD staffs the ZBA. And so I recognize that neither of you is in the position of being a ZBA board member or like on that. But I think Ford raised the point of, a fundamental issue we have is that it's like ultimately people have a right to appeal things to the ZBA. And we all know that there are things that are forbidden in zoning that the ZBA is never going to give people exceptions for. And then there are things where it does give them exceptions. And for whatever reason, this one is sort of falling into the second bucket. And personally, I think it's pretty specious because, as Ford acknowledged, like the standard for a variance is supposed to be hardship. And the idea that it's a hardship not to be able to do a forbidden lucrative use on my site just strikes me as not a hardship. But I guess I'm wondering whether there is if you could speak a little bit more to any sort of precedent, past examples of kind of the ZBA thinking more intentionally as a board about the kind of policy about what kinds of things it's going to give variances for or treat as truly forbidden. Because I think in some ways, like that's a big piece of what's going on here. So I would love to hear if there's any examples, if you think the executive suites example that Ford gave is useful vis-a-vis the Addison Street opinion, just like if either of you could speak to that. Because I think in many ways, that's what we really want is for the ZBA to think of this as a genuinely forbidden use in our neighborhoods.
Counselor, I'd say I don't know of any other examples off the top of my head where there's sort of a blanket policy of the board. Their decisions are non-precedent setting in the sense that similar or same application in one location that gets approved at the board doesn't necessarily mean that that type of application at a different location would be approved by the board. So each application is reviewed on its own, and those decisions are based on that particular application. I think the discretion of the board is really important here in the sense that as a body, they make the decision on whether or not they want to approve a variance or issue a conditional use permit at the application level. So
has there ever been at a minimum kind of, I get that the ultimate discretion is theirs, but has there ever been a kind of like effort to have like sort of a policy briefing conversation, et cetera, about kind of an emerging issue in the city? It just seems to me like, you know, maybe something came up initially around, I don't know, Airbnbs or anything that's kind of, because I think what we're dealing with, I mean, Rachel referenced this, when we set up those 3 districts, electronic billboards were not the thing that they are today, right? And now we're kind of facing this desired proliferation on the industry side. And it sort of feels like at a minimum, I would hope that the board would be having a conversation about how to think about this. And I don't know if there's a context of advising the board or creating the space for that kind of policy conversation to happen.
So I think there's 2 parts. As far as, you know, overall general policy goes, we are developing and conducting topic-specific trainings for the board members on updates to the zoning code, especially with we have a lot of new members and alternate members on the board. So making sure that the board members are aware of how the zoning code has changed over time, what new regulations are. I can think of, you know, cannabis as one piece where dedicated training and information is provided to the board, but that's something we're doing as part of Mayor Walsh's executive order. As far as soliciting input from Corporation Counsel, you know, in the case of the executive suites on Addison Street, that was something that the board solicited directly to the law department, and Corporation Counsel, as their legal advisor, provided feedback to them that they then refer to when considering cases for executive suites. So there's sort of a 2-part thing where if they're looking for particular advice, they can reach out to their legal advisor, and we, on the other hand, provide, you know, training and information on emerging things, and we'd be happy to continue doing that. Make sure that the board is trained and has all the information that they need to make decisions on upcoming and trending things.
Great, thank you. And I am sorry.
Counselor, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm just sorry for the
to build on what Chris just said about the executive suites. Executive suites are not forbidden; they're conditional. And I think one of the reasons why the Board of Appeal had asked Corporation Counsel for insight was because they had, at the time, they didn't know what kind of provisions to put on the conditional use. It's not forbidden, but they didn't know which ones to.
They are.
I have the amendment right in front of me, Ford.
Some of them are forbidden.
The reason why they reached out to Corporation Counsel was because they wanted some insight on what conditions they could put on any approval. And, you know, as Ford will probably, you know, attest to also, the chairwoman for the ZBA, you know, usually at the beginning of the meetings always says that there's no precedent. They take each case on its own merits. And I think, you know, executive suites is one. Chris had brought up another issue about cannabis. Cannabis, there were a couple of cases yesterday in the Fenway that cannabis establishments, there were 2 forbidden uses because they were within a half mile of each other and they were approved. And the way they were approved was they obtained a variance from the Board of Appeal, because a use is either allowed, you go for a conditional use, or you obtain a variance from the regulations of the code. And that's how forbidden uses, you know, we don't have different levels of what, you know, a good forbidden use, a bad forbidden use. When you look at the code, it's forbidden, whether it's a 2-family and a 1-family district, an electronic billboard, a cannabis establishment, you know, within a half mile of another, it's a forbidden use. And the only way that they obtain their use, if it is forbidden, is through the variance process.
Thanks, Jeff. And I just want to say, you know, I appreciate that. I think this was said by Mark, but I want to amplify that the BPDA has consistently opposed these, and I also appreciate the intention that Mark was expressing around, and what you're basically saying, right, is like the ZBA is gonna, or they have the ability to give some of these variances. And so what you all are thinking is, if if they give those variants, we want to make sure that we get to put conditions on the license, and that's not what happens today, for instance, in the Boston Bowl case, right?
That's exactly right, Counselor. I mean, Boston Bowl doesn't have to abide by any of the conditions listed in 11.7 because they did not obtain a conditional use permit. They obtained a variance, and they're not held to those requirements.
Right. And so I think, but I think, and I understand that. And I think that BPDA has good intentions there. I struggle with, I think I'm still in the headspace with many of the advocates here today that sort of, it creates a pathway that assumes that a bunch of these are going to get those variances. And I think we're still really trying to move away from those variances being granted. And so I think we're not sort of ready to concede that. But I understand why, from the agency's perspective, that's a way to hold these operators more accountable. One more question, Mr. Chairman, is just for ONS. It does seem to me, Ed, that it would be possible for ONS to take the policy that it opposes billboards in forbidden use areas. And I don't like, you know, the ZBA is a many-headed like thing, right? It's a bunch of commissioners making their own decisions. ONS is a unified office ultimately under the mayor's administration. And that does seem to me like something that there could be a policy decision on. And so I would like to hear how you all are thinking about these from your office, and sort of whether you guys would be open to committing to we're against electronic billboards outside of the permitted zones policy.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we facilitate every single appeal process. We try to give any applicant an even playing field with respect to, not only having their application heard, but brought through a process without a predetermined perspective. With respect to our determinations on billboards, I know highlighted was the Dorchester billboard, just to give, the idea that it was no one supported it just isn't true. I mean, there was a petition of over 100 people that supported it. The civic association in that area supported it. The process had continued for over a year. We don't have anything or any application that wants to go through appeal, we have to bring through a process. With respect to taking a position on that, we allow that process to be conducted. We talked to our superiors. At that time was Jerome Smith, the mayor of Boston. We present all of that information. Not only do we present that information to our superiors, we present that information to the Zoning Board of Appeals for them to also assess and make a decision. I personally cannot just carte blanche say that we will not be supporting any application that is looking for a variance to any particular use. But it is something that, is definitely in discussion. I'm aware of. It's not only, internally, I can tell you that my staff would definitely like to have a conversation about not having to facilitate meetings about billboards, since it's one of the most contentious and, high-spirited meetings. But at the same time, we believe it is our job to ensure that not only the applicant, but the constituents have a fair and even playing ground to present their cases and their opinions. And I know we've heard from Ford and others, and we're going to continue to do that and take those opinions of those different, stakeholders and present them to whoever is interested in doing it. But with respect to just saying that we're going to be opposed to absolutely every single one of them, it's not something that I can commit to today, but it is absolutely something I will commit to bringing down to the people that can make those decisions with respect to policies in this administration to see if we can get something enacted. With short-term rentals, it's another example of, trying to figure out exactly this gray area, how they utilize, the Zoning Board of Appeals system, where are the areas in which they should or should not be located, and things of that kind. So we don't create the policy. What we do though, is we try to provide everybody an opportunity to get their comments in, present those comments to the people that are making decisions. And then for us, we present that to the mayor. And once they make that decision, we execute that decision when it's appropriate, either be the Zoning Board of Appeal. But we do want to make sure that people are aware that they, and try to keep them as involved in these as possible. And so, some people feel that we've lacked in that area. I would love to continue to work with everybody to try to make sure we incorporate as many people as possible. But again, we just facilitate the public meetings, and before this administration, any public facilitation requirements to the Zoning Board of Appeal didn't even include an abutters process. So we created the 300-foot radius process of the application site. It was something that existed in South Boston and expanded it throughout the city. I've been in countless community processes, conversations with respect to billboards, but other forbidden uses as well. And And I know it's a sensitive topic, but as the facilitator of these processes, we try to stay pretty even keel with respect to that throughout the process until a decision needs to be made by the mayor.
And I hugely appreciate the work that you and your liaisons do to facilitate the process. And I think they bring lots of professionalism. And I'm not suggesting that you not facilitate these. I just want to put it on the record that, you know, I think this is something that a mayor could take a policy decision against. And I think that that's something that I hear many of my constituents asking the mayor's office to do. So I just want that registered. But thank you. And Mr. Chairman, those are my questions for now. Councillor Flynn.
I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Councilor Block. Councilor Braden, do you have any questions?
It's more of a comment, and I really value the incredible presentations this morning. Recognizing that outdoor advertising in the form of electronic billboards is a distraction is a given. I think the one thing we're missing in this conversation as a healthcare professional, I really would like to flag up how detrimental to the human health that artificial light sources are. There's an emerging body of scientific evidence that indicates that artificial light disrupts the sleep cycle, it disrupts hormones, it contributes to cancer in some populations. You know, I think in 20, 30, 40 years time, we'll be looking back at this moment and saying, why did we not pay more attention to the impacts of light pollution on the health of residents in urban areas? I really sympathize with the folks in areas like such as Chinatown that are faced with a huge increase in electronic billboards that impacts not only their outdoor exposure to light pollution, but also their indoor exposure, because it's very difficult to adequately screen out this light, and it can disrupt your circadian rhythm. It can disrupt your hormones. There are an increasing body of evidence that it is detrimental to human health. And I really feel that we shouldn't even be considering electronic light billboards in areas where people are actually living. And that's my penny worth. I think we really need to dig deeper into this and explore the health impacts. We're very critical about the location of marijuana dispensaries because of the potential ill effects on our young population and school-age children, etc. We ban, smoking in public places because of secondhand smoke. We should be scrutinizing the impacts of light pollution to the same extent. It's an evolving area with evolving body of evidence, but I think it certainly needs to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Mejia, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. Ford, if you're still in the house, thank you for your PowerPoint presentation. It's greatly appreciated in your advocacy. And Chris English, I hope you're doing well. It's good to see you here and everyone else. So I just have a quick question. Can you go into more detail about how the abutters are notified? Like, what does that outreach look like? And what is the language access component to this outreach? Just curious about that. And I'm also curious for the advocates. I think Ford and other advocates have given us our marching orders, and we should work with them to make sure that the changes he recommended get put through. And I'm just curious about what that will look like in terms of next steps. What are we thinking? How is this landing? And what else can we be doing? Because these hearings, I'm hoping, will move us in that direction. And I'm just curious in terms of who it is that, when I think about marching orders and I think about whose interests we have in mind, I do think that these billboards are an eyesore, and to some of the points that Ford made in terms of like some of the social determinants of health, what are we being exposed to, and how these subliminal messages impact our physical, mental, and even emotional well-being. And I'm just curious from a public health standpoint, how can we sound the alarm from that space? And have you all considered even a cap on the number of billboards that can be in a neighborhood. Has that been considered? I know it sounds like a question or a statement. I don't know what that was, but whoever, if there is a cap, I'd like to know about it.
Well, I'll speak to the abutters process as I'm the director of the Office of Neighborhood Services. So the abutters process, I mean, essentially starts when we get a rejection letter from the Inspectional Services Department. An applicant will reach out, and in that rejection letter, essentially it delineates what the application is and what they're seeking from a variance perspective or trying to get a conditional use. When that happens, we work with the applicant. We do have essentially what we do is we flyer a 300-foot radius of the building based off an abutters list that is generated from the assessing website. And then we have them flyer every single house. The flyers are, depending upon the neighborhood, are based on the demographic breakdown that we got from the census in coordination with the language and communications access team to ensure that if, you know, say there's like East Boston, for example, would need, you know, Spanish, Arabic, English, and potentially Italian. Chinatown clearly would have more than one, you know, simplified Chinese, as well as a few others. I mean, this has been a growing endeavor. It's something that, you know, we're continuously adapting to ensure that we are fitting to the fullest standards. But it is something that had recently been created within the last year and a half, 2 years under language access and accessibility. So after that process, there is also notification of the abutters from the Inspectional Services Department about, I think it's 2 weeks before the hearing. And then about 2 weeks before the hearing, and then they can go before the hearing and also speak to the comments that or provide comments to the board directly. And then I know there's also the state advertising board's process as well. I am not privy as to how they go about their notification standards and things of that kind, but there is another public process with respect to that constituents as well as, you know, elected officials and others can participate in. So that's for just the notification aspect of it. But again, we don't have control over the deferral aspect of it. If the applicant wants to defer, they can defer. Clearly, you know, precedent is typically 2 times, but there's clearly examples that have been highlighted here today where they've gotten more times or utilized other rules such as withdrawal. But anytime an application is going through and they're going through that appeal, we will stay with that until a withdrawal. And if they resubmit, then we'll go about the process again. So I can understand frustration with respect to that. And then we would conduct the same exact notification process again.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed.
Yep.
Councilor Mejia, any further questions? Councilor Mejia, you have to unmute yourself.
Of course I do. It would not be funning and entertainment unless I was unmuted. So I'm just curious about the marching orders. You know, we heard from the advocates. I'm just curious about what the path forward is in terms of implementing some of the recommendations that we heard, and you know, where are we landing on some of the recommendations that we got? Who can answer what those next steps are going to look like?
If I don't know if Chris wants to take it or Mark. If not, I think it's okay. And if you wanted to send any information to us, to the committee as a follow-up, we can certainly get that out to the public. But just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk now, or if you want to think about it. And
well, I think it's obvious that a briefing with the Zoning Board of Appeal might be something that is necessary. And you know, there is meetings being set up right now to discuss other policies such as the micro units and short-term housing that should be treated as such, to make sure that the Zoning Board of Appeal members are aware of the concerns that have been expressed by Ford and others, so that they can get the genuine opinion that forbidden usage should stay forbidden. Again, with respect to changing anything outside of that, my understanding, and if any of my other colleagues would like to chime in, is that it would be a statutory change, meaning that you would have to somehow try to limit the capabilities of the appeal. I don't necessarily know how that would go, but from an internal perspective, I think it's just continuing to have a conversation and solidify a policy at an administrative level for us in order to brief the zoning board of appeal on these opinions. They are an independent board, so I don't know if there's anything that they need to take and put ironclad, but at the same time, I think it would be the first step in many to trying to get, the actual perspective that, has been provided here to be taken more seriously and to consider that times are changing and they're seeing an uptick that they don't like.
Yeah, so I'd like to yield the rest of my time to make sure that Suzanne Lee, who's also lined up to testify, that she has an opportunity to do so because I believe she has to leave soon. Councillor Flynn, so I'll yield the rest of my time to make sure that she has an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia.
I'd like to speak before another public person, Eddie, if that's possible.
Yes, that's fine. That's fine, Councillor Baker. Go ahead, Councillor Baker.
Is it my turn? Thank you.
Yes.
A couple things, a lot of comments, I think, here. If I were to put a sports analogy on the Phillips House billboard, I feel like Bill Buckner in the 86 World Series when the ball went right through his leg. I couldn't have been any more clear my opposition on that. And then to know that my office was unable to express opposition. They went to lunch, and then when they came back to lunch, he was unable to get back on. So that doesn't sit right with me now. And I don't know if I'll go in front of the state's outdoor advertising board and make my case there. But to say that, I mean, Dorchester doesn't agree on anything, but what we agreed on is we don't want billboards unless there's some sort of deal worked out. Ford had talked about all the blight. Now let's get this straight. When these advertising companies landed all these billboards, they went into the inner city, they went into places like Dorchester, Roxbury, along our highways, and they just littered our neighborhoods with this blight. I wouldn't be, couple things. I think there should be a moratorium on these billboards. If we're able to say no short-term rentals, which I think hurts a lot of small property owners that could use this as an option to be able to pay their mortgage now, especially in a time like this where we have unprecedented amounts of vacant apartments. I think we should absolutely get together and call a moratorium on these billboards. Then if there's a moratorium and we're in these companies that are making millions now, from my understanding, the numbers can be anywhere like, and this is, I talk mostly about the billboards along the highway, because that's what I have. I have the highway. So a billboard potentially can go from, and this would be the landlord, the landowner would get probably anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 a month in rent from someplace like Outfront or Clear Channel. Now that money goes to like 50 grand or 60 grand. I'm not sure. That's just what I've heard. I think the numbers are pretty close here. So we're talking a landlord taking a piece of what they own and going from maybe 80,000 a year in revenue to close to $1 million. And from my experience with dealing with Clear Channel in particular, they want to cut these fake deals. Oh yeah, we'll get rid of billboards. We'll get rid of billboards. We'll get rid of billboards, and we'll give your community this. They're not to be trusted at all. So until we're able to hold to really hold their feet to the fire, and if we are, and again, I'm back to the billboards on the highway. I wouldn't be opposed to 2 billboards or maybe 3 billboards on the highway if I were able to remove. And I've given Clear Channel a list of, I think, 40 or 50 billboards that are all in my neighborhood that are cluttering Dot Ave, cluttering Bowden Street, cluttering Dudley Street. They don't want to get rid of them. So when I'm dealing with somebody and it's a total one-way street, and the city's dealing with Clear Channel and they're dealing with Outfront, and it's a one-way street. So why are we in the relationship with them? We should be telling them, you're not getting anything until you come back with us on a plan on how these billboards, the paper billboards that are in all our neighborhoods, in my neighborhoods, want to see all of those come down. All of them come down. Not like, oh, maybe this one, maybe that one. Take all of them down that have been advertising alcohol and cigarettes and whatever else. We buy ugly houses. Or Funny the Tea got rid of alcohol advertising on the trains, but on their billboards on .av, they can advertise weed maps. It's just crazy to me. There also ought to be a plan with the state. We should be working with the state here, because another thing that happened in my district, and it's on city land, it's at least 1/4 city land down on Von Hilleren Street. The state allowed Clear Channel to just come in and put a digital billboard there. The city owns 1/4 of the land. I think the city owns all the land because it's a former street. And we don't get a red cent for it, nothing at all. We're looking to try and keep our parks clean and keep doors open and keep people working, and we're not getting a red cent. That's just one billboard. I've gone on a little bit there, but I want to talk to Ford about the food bank. I was involved in that, and I don't have a problem with that because that's $1 million generated a year that goes directly into the food bank to buy food. So if we're able to cover needs with this, then I can handle the pain of a digital billboard in my district there. But the billboard companies, they're the worst of the worst. They're not going to stay by their word. They haven't. Ford talked about it earlier. That they make these deals, but they're not ironclad. We're not getting anything, and it's blight. It's blight in our neighborhoods. They're not in Weston. They're not in Wellesley. They're not in Newton. Their executives are living in those places, but they're in our neighborhoods. And for the city to not take a hard look at it, again, we can hurt small property owners because you can't do Airbnb, you can't get an executive suite. And that's ironclad. We're not going to allow any executive suites. But big business that doesn't even have a Boston presence, they just have the billboards. We're going to allow them to walk on us and not get anything from them. I think we as the city, myself included, are derelict in not holding their feet to the fire. So if I were in charge, there would be no more billboards until we got them in front of us. And they said, okay, if you want one billboard, we want something from you, because the money is astronomical. And another thing that these billboards companies do, and you'll see them, it's Clear Channel now. It's going to be a different company in 5 years, and then it'll be a different company in 10 years after that. That's how they get away from paying their debts to the neighborhoods. And as far as no, Eddie, I love you like a son, a brother, a nephew, but to say that there was no opposition in that billboard down there isn't correct. People were looking, the Phillips family did a good job in going all around Dorchester and people that they had relationships and getting letters to. But if you want 1,000 letters of opposition to that billboard, give me a week and I'll get them to you. So that to me, again, here I am standing in front of you as Bill Buckner. I just lost my neighborhood, my district, the World Series. So that's a little bit of what I had to say. I don't know if it made any sense, but we shouldn't even be in the business dealing with these billboard companies because they're not to be trusted. And again, my knowledge comes, my dealings are all the along the highway. So it's a little different than the in the neighborhoods billboards, which who in their right mind would buy something with the light on all night long? All right, I'm going to bed, can't shut the light off. It's bad. If you look at Buttonwood Street, when the Carpenters Union billboard is on, go down to Buttonwood Street, the flat side. Eddie, you know where Buttonwood Street is. Stand there and see if you would want to be living on Buttonwood Street with that light on. I know I had more points, but I'll leave it at that. I'm a little ginned up about this. I don't think I can't even believe we're having this conversation. I could not have been any more clear with the Menino administration, with the Walsh administration, with Jerome, with BPDA. Why are we allowing any of these to go forward? It's a blight, and they're in our neighborhoods. They're not where the executives are. They're in our neighborhoods. Drive around, look at where they are. So thank you. The billboard companies should be coming in and taking down all the garbage that's around our neighborhoods in Roxbury, in Dorchester, in South Boston, in Charlestown, downtown. It's garbage. It's like they take their garbage, you open the door and you throw it on the street. That's what they're doing in our neighborhood. So we are being too soft with them. Again, can't help but to draw the parallel with, we're going to hurt a small property owner and said, no, you can't do executive suites. By the way, was a business that was up and running long before Airbnb was even around. So we should be revisiting that too. Ford, I have to disagree with you there. I think we should be letting some executive suites go through, especially if someone can prove that they're going to be a good operator. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. At this time, I'm going to go into public testimony. We're going to try to be as brief as possible. I know there are no more councilors on here. Kerry, could we start with Suzanne Lee as a request to Councilor Mejia? I know Suzanne has another meeting at 11:30. Want to see if I can kind of key her up if that's possible. Hi, Suzanne. You're on, Suzanne.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. I've been sitting here listening to all the talk, and I am so grateful for my counselor, Ed Flynn, for putting this on, because this issue has been an ongoing issue, not only for Chinatown, but for the whole city. And most of you know me that I've been working with neighborhoods and with our citizens, particularly immigrant community, to participate in and voice their opinions and make their voices heard. This issue is amazing to me, how much their voices has been ignored. How in the world can we allow the ZBA to keep deferring meetings, appeals, only, well, I don't know if that's true, but at least in the Chinatown case, that zoning meeting on the billboard was deferred 4 times. And each time we have to bring people to the zoning board of appeal, and people sit there and you don't get to know that they have deferred until maybe 5 minutes before the time to call, but people sat there for an hour. So it really raises the question, why are all these city, particularly the city boards and our city government, who's supposed to work for citizens and our residents? But really, it raises the question, is what Councilor Baker was saying, is run by the big business. And I don't think that's a good message for us to send to our citizens and our voters, that this is what city government is for. And I so appreciative Councilor Bach and Councilor Brendan, the issues that you raised. And the reason we oppose those billboards, and we have thousands of petitions that's already sent in to the zoning board opposing that, but yet it doesn't seem to make a difference. So I just want to add my 2 cents, and you know that I work with the Chinese Progressive Association, so we have members throughout the city, not just Chinatown. And we are very concerned about the quality of life for all of our residents. And billboard has no, particularly electronic billboards, have no place in our neighborhoods. And furthermore, I want to put a plug in that we need to reform the ZBA. That kind of, and Ford is right, that we need to put that out there, that ZBA should not hold all that kind of power to ignore all the citizens' voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for your testimony, for your leadership. And Suzanne was a school teacher and the principal at Josiah Quincy School, and very active in Chinatown. So thank you for your leadership, Suzanne.
Thank you.
So thank you. So Kerry, I'm going to go into public testimony. If people raise their blue hand, and to get as many people to testify as we can, I would like to respectfully ask if you could keep your comments to 1 minute, if possible. I'm not going to cut you off, but in the interest of time and letting others speak, could we try to do it for 1 minute? And maybe I'll give you a warning after that, but I'm not going to cut people off. But I want to try to get as many of these public testimony in as I can. So Kerry, I think maybe if you want to start letting people in? Is that the best way to do it?
I think I'm going to just activate folks to speak from the attendee pool. So starting with Maria Lyons and then Anthony, and then Ryan Towers. We'll go down the list of folks as they raise their hand, and we'll just let them speak. So Maria, if you'd like to speak, unmute yourself and you can begin. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maria Lyons. I am the environmental chairperson for the Port Norfolk Civic Association. I'm also on the board of directors of the Neponset River Greenway Council and the Neponset Watershed Association. And I'm a science teacher, and I've lived in Dorchester my entire life, and I'm quite old now. But anyway, I'd like to just quickly point out a few things about the Boston Bowl situation. They went through 5 years of deferments, at least 12 appearances, at which time there were neighborhood representatives at each and every one of those meetings. There was a no vote by the Port Norfolk Civic Association, and 14 Dorchester Civic Associations all joined together to vote for no more new billboards or digital conversions. There was also opposition from environmental groups. We had no notice of the meeting that happened during COVID when we were told there weren't going to be any ZBA hearings. All of a sudden it pops up. I was told by the Board of Appeal executive secretary and the mayor's office that that's because you don't get notifications on deferrals. But apparently they had run out of deferrals, and this was a new filing. So technically we should have been notified. Also, because it was a new filing, all the letters of opposition from many people and groups were taken out because it was a new one. So you really can't have it both ways. It went into the hearing. It's supposed to be forbidden by zoning. There is a clause that it can be conditional under special circumstances as voted on by the ZBA, but it was proposed as conditional, which was wrong. And I believe Christopher English pointed that out earlier, that the ZBA has to determine that. So that was wrong. And what Ed McGuire said was highly misleading and misrepresentative. And now I don't know whether the Boston Bowl proponents are misleading the city or the city is complicit in all of this. But the 100 letters of support that he's talking about are letters from businesses that were probably at the Boston Board of Trade. They're all friends of the Boston Bowl business people, and they signed letters in support. Many of those businesses aren't even in the area. They're up at Ashmont or Fields Corner and so forth. So, and why should the businesses determine what goes in the neighborhood? So that's highly misleading. They even say on the letters that they're abutters, which is untrue. So they're fraud. They should have been thrown out. In their petition, they have people sign. Obviously, they had people at the bowling alley sign. Again, very few of the people that have signed those petitions even live in Neponset. So their widespread support is just a falsehood. Many people are opposed to this. The letter from the Pope's Hill Neighbor Association is one man, the president. He signed that. They did not have a vote. The neighborhood did not have a vote on that. There was no robust community meeting on this. This is all falsehoods. Now, as far as the actual ZBA hearing, there was no mention of the Port Norfolk neighborhood in which it sits at all, because we were opposed and they knew it. They have no mention that the fact that this is going to be highly visible from Tinian Beach, Victory Road Park, and the Port Norfolk neighborhood. No mention that the Neponset River estuary, which is within 300 feet of it, is an area of critical environmental concern. And it is known that bright lights interfere with migrating birds and other wildlife as well. So this is not, and why should the people sitting at Tinian Beach, the poor people have to go to Tinian because they can't afford to go to Situate, where the owners of Boston Bowl are from, which, by the way, does not allow any billboards in Situate. Why should the poor people that have to go to Tinian Beach, which has been done very nicely by the DCR up, have to sit there and look at billboards? It is against state regulations, and I hope the state, when it goes to the DOT, is going to shut it down. I hope the mayor will reconsider and take his support away, because I think he was misled. And I hope the city councilors will join with Councilor Baker, thank you, and attending and writing letters to the the DOT, when it does come up in front of the state advertising board, to say we do not want this in this area. To phrase an ironic phrase, this situation of this billboard is the poster child of where there shouldn't be one. It's in along the highway that has many accidents. So that right there is bad. And the other side of the highway is an area of critical environmental concern. It's one of the few areas where you can actually look out and see the water. And you want to put a digital billboard there, which is just blight. And the fact that people are trying to push these all around the city is very upsetting. Why should anyone have to stand for this? It's just amazing. But this particular hearing, there was so many misrepresentations, so many lies going on during it, so many deletions of facts that the whole thing should have been thrown out. But the system is you can't even appeal unless you're an abutter. So we're going to go to the Board of Trade. If there's something else that can happen, city councilors, I'd love to know. But at least I hope that you would be committed to all of you here and maybe other city councilors who aren't here to joining us in the opposition when it goes to the state board. Thank you very much for having this hearing and for letting me speak my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Next up is Anthony Disidoro from Alston and Brighton. Go ahead, Tony.
He's on mute.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Tony Disidoro. I am president of the Alston Civic Association. I too would like to thank the chair and Councilor Bach for sponsoring this important hearing. Mr. Chairman, with Sullivan's on Castle Island opening this Saturday, I'm hoping that this sense of optimism we feel today can be extended to exposing this charade masquerading as good public policy and a community benefit. Although the negative impacts of billboards are well known and are effectively being expressed today, in the time I have, I would like to focus on this critical opportunity to restore faith in our political system by combating the corruptive influence of money in politics, promoting ethics and transparency in government, protecting communities against abuses of government power, and limiting certain extraordinary exercises of administration authority. The Alston Civic Association was founded in 1962 in an effort to push back as a community with the impending decision by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to extend the Massachusetts Turnpike east from Newton to Boston. That decision split our community in half, took away our commuter rail stations, which only recently, after 50 years, Boston Landing became a reality, wiped out businesses and homes, and has promoted long-term environmental impacts that have adversely impacted our quality of life. It is no wonder, given that perspective, how the issue you have before you is personal to the residents of Alston and Brighton, who demand social, economic, political, and environmental justice. On November 13, 1991, through a collaborative effort by the city, residents, community leaders, and business owners, Article 51, the Alston Brighton Neighborhood District, was inserted into the Boston Zoning Code. Article 51 emphatically declares that going forward, billboards are a forbidden use. If you surveyed our residents today, that intention is stronger than ever and is devoid of any interest in entertaining requests for zoning relief. Given that, then why is Alston Brighton continually targeted for new installations? It's all about who we are and where we are located. We are exposed to greedy predators who target our low-income and immigrant neighborhoods and our proximity to the Massachusetts Turnpike, potentially disrupting our ability to build sustainable communities. So what does it take to ensure our voices are heard, that accountability and transparency is restored, and that this old school practice of proponents with hooks imposing themselves on vulnerable communities is stopped once and for all? The dictionary defines exploitation as the fact of making use of a situation to gain unfair advantage for oneself. It takes political leadership to tighten the Boston zoning code that currently provides a pathway around a forbidden use and legal standing for proponents who are unsuccessful with the city review process. I know in many ways this is a novel approach, but it's about empowering communities who are in it for the long haul, rather than empowering bureaucrats and big business who come and go and seek to assure residents that they know what's in their best interest. Again, I want to thank the chair and Councilor Bach for sponsoring this hearing and the support of the Boston City Council, including our District Councilor Liz Braden for her continued support. Let's be bold and do what is expected of us. And I also want to add a special thank you to Councilor Baker for his passionate testimony that hit right to the point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're on mute, Eddie.
You're on mute.
I apologize about that. The next person I'm going to call on is Ryan Powers. Ryan, if you're able to keep your comments to 1 minute or so, we just want to try to get as many comments in as we can.
Absolutely. I will do the best I can. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you. My name is Ryan Powers, and I've lived downtown for the last 15 years. I'm a homeowner and trustee at 42 Beach Street, a 32-unit condo building situated directly across the street from the proposed Chinatown billboard. This proposed billboard would hang over a busy sidewalk, shine directly into our homes and those of our neighbors, which are just a mere 50 feet away. I am strongly opposed to electronic billboards like this because of their significant impact to quality of life, light pollution, traffic safety, and future precedent. As you saw in the presentation done by Ford, the light pollution from the W Hotel billboard is incredibly offensive and can be seen even when not in direct line of sight of that billboard. The surrounding buildings really act as a perfect vector with glass and the surrounding materials, which reflect and refract that light up and down Nealon and Stewart Street. It's really something to see when you're down in the neighborhood. Billboard operators will often make dubious claims about how these large displays output less light and have no more impact than a street lamp. They'll use pseudoscientific terms like sky lumens to try to confuse the community and officials to try to downplay or minimize the impact to communities. In reality, you'll end up with a billboard like you saw in the presentation at the W, and who would want that? And I have a couple of examples here about who doesn't want it. And apparently not even a billboard operator like Dominic Serra would. He's the owner of the media company who's attempting to erect the sign in Chinatown. In his previous failed attempt to put a billboard downtown, he's actually quoted as saying, "We took the area into consideration, so it's not shining in anyone's windows." He actually went on to say further, quote, "Look, I own a house and I don't want a digital billboard across the street from my house either." He and his company have also touted that a proposed billboard in the West End wouldn't face homes. So a lot of contradiction, and it doesn't make any sense. And in closing, over the last year plus, I've been to multiple meetings. I find the zoning variance process tilted in favor of outdoor advertising. They'll use really well-worn set of tactics that are both malicious and predatory, including repeated deferrals, paying charitable organizations to support their cause, to name a few. And just my last statement, Ed, I promise I'm done after this. As a resident of the city, I have a reasonable expectation that a billboard will not be erected directly in front of my home. Billboards are a parasite within their host community. They really have no place in Boston because of their immeasurable damage they cause to direct abutters, community members, and the broader city and its residents. Using peripheral support from community charitable organizations as a factor that's considered for variance approval is extremely subjective, inappropriate, and ripe for abuse. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you, Ryan. We're going to get into next testimony is Martin Rotterdam.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate
we lost you there. I think you may have been on mute. You may have to unmute yourself again.
Am I now unmuted?
Yes, you're okay now.
Thank you. Sorry. So I live in the Back Bay and really represent the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay in ADCO, and I'm also a member of the executive committee of NAB. And I've been thinking of the appropriate word to describe these electronic billboards, and the best one I've come up with so forth is that they are, from every perspective in the areas where they're being proposed, absolute and utter abominations, aesthetically and otherwise. And I think a number of people before me have made the points about health, about property values, and about safety. And who is it who bears the brunt of this harm? The externalities, if you like. It's like living next to a plant which is polluting the air or polluting the water, and the person who runs the plant and makes money off it is making a lot of money and not paying the costs that other people are incurring. So these externalities are a significant factor, and that leads to a new source of concern for me, at least, because we've seen this insidious attempt by the companies, the billboard companies, to say, well, we'll give a certain amount of money to causes that everybody knows and everybody perceives as being worthy, such as affordable housing, such as the Pine Street Inn. And good heavens, I mean, the Pine Street Inn is a fantastic organization, but there is a risk that if they get involved in taking money from electronic billboards that residents really hate and dislike, that their support for these worthy causes will diminish. And that raises the question of, if these causes are so worthy, are there not other ways of finding funds to help them than having to introduce this blight upon our neighborhoods? And the answer is certainly in some cases, undoubtedly, yes. What about all the advertisers who make use of these billboards and advertising their products and services? Why don't they give money directly to the worthy causes that they feel they should support, and thereby gain the goodwill of residents, instead of, in fact, do the opposite, really annoying residents? The other point I'd like to make finally is the question of power and politics. I have actually a great deal of respect for the ZBA, given the enormous workload that they have and the number and variety of issues that they have to deal with, and the many hours it takes to deal with it, even if at the same time, as one among many residents, I find I'm wasting a lot of hours waiting for something to come up, which is then deferred. And my concern here has to do with the fact that companies, as has been pointed out, if they are rejected by the CBA, can go to Superior Court. And once you get one or two of these variances, or whatever they're called, through, then they can start whining and moaning about how their rights are being violated, and they're quite likely to find some judge somewhere who say that's correct. So whatever the city does will not be effective. And that suggests that the city must make it quite clear that this whole process by which you can go and apply for variance for something like electronic billboards in residential areas, they should not be a forbidden use, they should simply be banned. And I think that there is a need to change the process, because if we rely upon the traditional approach towards zoning, it's not going to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Next up, we have John Brookston. John, I don't know if you have to unmute yourself. I don't see you up there, but
okay.
Go ahead, John.
Now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Good. I'm a resident of Fenway on the Fenway Civic Association Board, and a representative from Fenway Civic to ADCO. If it hadn't been for ADCO, this issue, the executive suite issue, the short-term rental in general issue, would never have been addressed. And it is amazing that the neighborhood, that the city neighborhood representative is saying, well, we give notice to people within 300 feet. Light doesn't stop at 300 feet, and it impacts people that are substantially farther away. It certainly impacts all the people that are passing on the roads. And I can tell you, to get from East Fenway, where I live, to West Fenway, you have to pass by Lansdowne Street, and the flashing of that electronic billboard is like a light explosion. It takes your attention away. It is offensive, and it should never have been put there. It is one of the areas where billboards are allowed, thanks to lobbying, I'm sure, by the Red Sox. But whatever is going on with electronic billboards, it is terribly offensive. I have been sitting and waiting at ZBA hearings many times because the claim that there is no opposition, which ONS has made, is just not true. ONS has to keep a copy of all of the neighborhood opposition, not just what comes in from a resubmitted application. ONS knows that the Boston Bowl billboard was opposed by many, many, many residential concerns, and that it should never have been told, they should never have told the ZBA that it was a conditional use. It wasn't. It was a forbidden use, and they should have showed the opposition to it. Thank you for your holding the hearing. I thank Councilor Bach. I know she shares our concerns, and the other councilors who have talked. But if there's this much opposition, just ban it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Councilor Flynn, I'd just like to go on record just to state that I wasn't saying there was no opposition to any particular proposal. There definitely was opposition to the Dorchester billboard, but there was also support of that billboard from other stakeholders, as there are in every single one of these cases. There isn't just all opposition or all support. It's a mixed mash of different opinions. Our position at the Office of Neighborhood Services is to collect those opinions and to submit them all to the Zoning Board of Appeal members, as well as our superiors. And so with respect to saying that we're not acknowledging the opposition or we're just acknowledging the support isn't true, the reality is we're trying to make it a process in which everyone feels comfortable in expressing their opinions, be that in support, non-opposition, whatever it may be, in providing that. And so I just want to make sure it's very clear. I'm not trying to take away from the opposition. Clearly, our office had a difference of opinion than the sitting councilors or others, but we do collect all of that and evenly distribute it amongst the people who are going to be making the ultimate decision, being the Zoning Board of Appeal. So I just want to make that very clear. And if there is a misunderstanding in my statement, it was that in the entirety of that process, there was a varieties of different representation. And I am aware that there are a variety of people here who disagree with our decision, and that's fine. I'll be making sure that gets down to the mayor and others ultimately. But again, we tried to make it a process in which everyone feels comfortable, whether or not their opinion aligns with, either it be a particular civic group or elected official. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. The next person I'd like to call on is Coughlin Becky.
Yeah, Ed, it's Chris Betke. Our firm, you're reading our firm idea, folks. Good news is I have a conference call in a couple of minutes, so I will keep my talk brief by necessity. I want to thank you to our superstar city councilor, Ed Flynn, for putting this on, as well as Councilor Bach and all the other councilors who appeared today. Councilor Baker, I think, stole many of my lines about these being trash or litter. I'm the head of the Leather District Neighborhood Association. A few quick points. One, I do think the deferral process needs to be revisited. I don't think it's sufficient to say if people want to defer, they can defer. I'm an attorney. Courts set hearing dates. You have to go there. They set rules about if you want a continuance, you have to ask for it in advance. There is certainly no reason that an applicant should be there are good reasons for deferrals. There is no good reason why the deferral has to be asked for or articulated at the very moment of the hearing. The only reason for doing that is to allow the applicant to see if opposition shows up and then to go forward or not go forward. There is absolutely no reason why, if there's a good reason for a deferral, it can be stated in advance, and therefore people will not have to waste their time at a hearing. There's no good reason for that. So that has to be revisited and improved. In addition, there should be a limit set on the number of deferrals. if you expect to take up the time and taxpayers' money in using our city government, you should have your ducks semi in a row. I understand the necessity for a deferral from time to time. Sometimes neighborhood meetings don't go forward. Sometimes things have to be worked out. Understood. Again, that should be articulated in advance, and there should be a limit to the number of deferrals. I submit that if you need more than 2 deferrals over the life of an application, you have not done your work properly, and you should automatically be denied, because you need to go back to square one, because obviously you don't have your ducks in a row, and you should not be able to take up the time and resources of city government with your nonsense. Get your ducks in a row. So that's about the process. With respect to billboards, I echo everything that Ford said. A fantastic presentation, by the way, probably overshadowed only by that tremendous beard that he was sporting today. Having said that, I just want to point out a particular point. In our neighborhood, there was a proposal for a billboard on the back of the event. I can't think of what the company calls themselves now, the steam plant on Nealon Street. It would be very lucrative. They offered our neighborhood tons of money if we would have supported that. And so take that as a snapshot. Now, it so happens our particular neighborhood is not economically disadvantaged, so we didn't jump at it. Instead, we prioritized the look and feel of our city. We didn't want people to be welcomed to Boston with a giant Red Bull sign or an advertisement for Bud Light and things of that nature on a giant billboard as you drove into Boston. However, if we were economically disadvantaged and we saw an opportunity to get some basic services or basic things in our neighborhood, we might have gone for that. The reason why I bring that up is it is not an appropriate approach to go neighborhood by neighborhood with respect to things that impact the city as a whole. This is visual litter that all of us will be exposed to. This is not whether or not there'll be a dentist's office on a particular street and whether they need a zoning variance or something like that. This is something that impacts the entire city. And therefore, giving particular preference to a local group that supports something like this is not entirely appropriate. I think neighborhoods have to be considered, but there has to be an overall holistic look at this. These things are not good for a city. They are visual litter. Two quick points. One, when I asked the person, the proponent of the billboard, what good does this do? Aside from you offering us money, what good does this do? The person was stymied. They could not answer what social good, what positive thing a billboard brings, because there is none. I think she ultimately stumbled around to say, well, you can learn about new movies. Well, I carry something around in my pocket every day that tells me everything I need to know about new movies. Billboards are visual litter. When I travel around the country and I do a lot for business, I always love when I come back to Boston and I get in an Uber or a cab and I'm heading back into my neighborhood and I marvel about just how beautiful our city is. And it's as beautiful as it has ever been as compared to other cities. And yet we are in this constant fight for it not to be defaced. Why should we be fighting about this? We should all be in agreement. Do not deface our city. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I have to run, but I do have to jump off for a call. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And again, Councilor Flynn, you are a superstar. All of you, thank you for participating here today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for joining us. John Lyons.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Councilor. Thank everyone for attending today. Ford gave a tremendous presentation, and I won't repeat what he said. I also want to thank Councilor Baker in particular for representing this community as well as he has through the years, and particularly with regard to this issue. I completely understand what took place in that one instance, and I don't question what Councilor Baker had to say today at all. I am the president of the Port Norfolk Civic Association. I've lived in Boston my entire life, most of it in Dorchester, the last 40 years in Port Norfolk. In the 40 years during which I've been a member of the Port Norfolk Civic Association, The membership has rejected every billboard proposal. In several instances, there were offers of substantial mitigation payments which were rejected. The community generally believes that billboards are regarded as a blight on the landscape, and electronic billboards are a particularly egregious form of that blight. Billboards derive their significant value at the detriment of every property within view of the site and every pedestrian and driver forced to see it. In December 2014, 14 Dorchester civic associations met to develop a joint statement in opposition to any new billboards whatsoever. And throughout that following winter and spring, the memberships all voted to sign on and endorse that letter, which was delivered to Mayor Walsh in May 2015. We had a meeting with the mayor in June of 2016, at which time we understood that there was a ban on electronic billboards anywhere in the city except for the 3 permitted areas, and that there would be notice to us if there was going to be a change in that policy. So it was very disappointing to me to see that ONS appeared at the Boston Bowl hearing and testified that they were in favor, and further represented that there was substantial community support. The community support which they claim to have, as demonstrated by a pile of signatures and petitions, from our review of those documents indicates that it was a combination of petitions that were apparently left on the table where people sign up to bowl, and a number of other letters from alleged abutters were all signed on the same day, which happens to coincide with the annual meeting of the Dorchester Board of Trade. And virtually every one of those signatures is not in fact an abutter. Many, if not most of them, do not even live in Dorchester. But as expressed by previous testimony, this is not just a Port Norfolk, Neponset, Dorchester issue. This is a citywide issue. Within neighborhoods, billboards are typically located in the least affluent areas. They're just another example of economic and environmental injustice. They serve no good other than to generate revenue for their owners. I can't understand how anyone can even discuss letting them in. Some things are negotiable. Most things are negotiable, but some are non-negotiable. And this is one of them. They're nothing but a detriment to the city. The present classification as forbidden should be maintained and respected. And as far as using the Board of Appeal on a piecemeal basis to allow these applications, I think it speaks to a policy of either changing or circumventing the code by fiat. There is a process to amend the zoning code. And I think if anyone attempted to amend the code to permit these, it will be swiftly defeated. That's why the policy of piecemeal is still being pursued, because there is so much money being thrown around by the industry in support of it. So again, I thank the council for conducting this hearing. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank everyone else for your participation.
Thank you, John. We have another person that wants to testify, Fred W. Go ahead, Fred.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. We just want to mention, I had sent in a written testimony, but I just had a few comments that I wanted to make, just kind of get it on the record and to get it out there.
Go ahead, Fred.
My name is Fred DiFiore, and I live in the West End, and I'm representing the position of the West End Civic Association, also a liaison with ADCO. The following a proposal from Media Vision, the West End Civic Association had a board meeting where it was decided that the Civic Association would oppose any and all electronic billboards in the city, whether they be in the West End or any other downtown neighborhood or any other surrounding neighborhood, anywhere in the city of Boston. A lot of that opposition is based on a belief that these electronic billboards serve no purpose other than to generate revenue. And wherever there's money to be made, unfortunately, there's people that are willing to work the system as much as they can and are persistent about working the system. We see no benefit at all to the public at large. As has been mentioned, there's various concerns with their safety hazards for drivers, pedestrians, cyclists alike, negative impacts on the quality of life for residents, the associated light pollution. And one of the big fears we have is that if the electronic billboards get a foothold in the city, then eventually you're going to have a number of little time squares popping up everywhere. And that's really it's a citywide issue. And, you know, the West End stands with the rest of the neighborhoods in the city in opposing, you know, anything. One of the things that, just not having a legal background, whenever I see something like forbidden use, to me, forbidden use means there should be no conditional use, no variance. It's forbidden. So it should not happen. And it would be nice if the city went along with that, and hopefully we'll get to that point eventually. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak and to have this hearing.
Thank you, Fred. Just want to ask the administration that's still here. I just want to say thank you. This is wrapping up now. I just wanted to see if Chris or Mark or Ed, if you wanted to give a response to Councilor Flaherty's early question, or if you want to send a statement to me later or an email. But just wanted to give you the opportunity to respond to Councilor Flaherty's earlier question.
And that was, Councilor Flynn, was that the question regarding signage, the marquee signage, if you will, on the top of the buildings? And I don't know if Jeff Hampton is still with us. I'm pretty sure, and I do have to get back to be completely confident, but I'm pretty sure we have restrictions in the code already on that. But again, Jeff, if you're still on, if you can add some more, but I'll confirm and get back to you on that, Councilor.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor. To be honest with you, I think most of those buildings that have the marquee signage up there went through the Article 80 process. And I think the comprehensive design review through Article 80 is how those signs were approved. I'm not really sure. I can't recall whether it be Converse, Verizon, anybody else who has gone before the Board of Appeal. That doesn't mean that it hasn't happened. It's just that I know all of those projects were done through large project review. And there is, under Article 80, a provision for comprehensive sign review. So that may have been how they were approved, but if you would like, I can look into it further, see if it has indeed gone before the Board of Appeal. I can get back to you and Councilor Flaherty at a later time to see how those were approved.
Yeah, that would be great, Jeff. Thank you. Before I offer closing remarks, I wanted to give the administration an opportunity to end the meeting. I know it's been going on over 2 hours now, but if all of you want to speak, or one of you want to speak, Ed, Mark, Chris, Jeff, just want to give you guys the opportunity to offer closing remarks.
I just would like to say thank you for, allowing us to have the opportunity to speak today, as well as, allowing the constituents and advocates to come out and express their opinions. They're definitely duly noted, and I'm going to ensure that, it gets down to not only the mayor, but my supervisors. And we look forward to continuing to work through, the coming processes until, substantive change comes. We will be facilitating and continue to facilitate abutters public processes related to, every use and appeal of those uses. And with that, I hope that we could just have, cordial dialogue with respect to it, and making sure that, everyone's opinion is noted and sent to the appropriate places. So if there's ever any concern with that, I also oversee the Office of Neighborhood, 311 and the Office of Neighborhood Services, but, I assure you that we're taking your concerns and reiterating them to their location that they need to be in. And again, it's a passionate topic, and I hope that we can make progress in the right way so that the city is better off at the end. Again, thank you very much for all the comments and concerns.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for being here with us. Anyone else want to, the administration want to testify? We'll just leave it at that.
I'll just say the same thing, Councilor, to particularly the members of the public. Obviously, I was taking notes here on the council's comments, the members of the public, and we're going to take that information back. Quite frankly, like I said before, when we have meetings on this subject, the individual signs themselves, generate a lot of activity. You know, the policy conversations around these, not so much. And so this is, and again, I really appreciate yourself and Councilor Bach calling this hearing. It really does bring attention. It gives us the feedback that we need. So particularly folks like Ford, I know we've met and discussed this issue before, and I look forward to continuing to do that, because we were taking notes and Jeff and I were texting back and forth on some ways we might be able to address some of the problems that we heard here today. So just want to say thank you and look forward to that spirit of cooperation going forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mark. So I just want to end by saying thank you to the administration team that is here. I want to say thank you to the panelists that provided excellent testimony. I want to say thank you to my colleagues for their statements and their questions, especially also the public for being on this call for over 2 hours and offering testimony about the impact electronic billboards have on their community. I want to say thank you to Kerry at Central staff and Juan as well, and my staff as well. I didn't offer opening statements or a closing statement, but what I would like to say is this is the Committee on City Neighborhood Services. I'm going to continue having I'm going to have a working session on this subject to continue the discussion going. My plan is to have a working session within the next 30 days or so. And as Eddie mentioned and Mark mentioned, in my committee, everybody's voice will be heard and respected, and there'll be a good dialogue. And for me, that's what's the most important thing as the committee chair and as the district city councilor on where many of these billboards are. For me, it's about quality of life of the residents. It's about pedestrian safety. It's about public safety, public health, the neighborhood process. A lot of the comments that were already made by the public and in my colleagues. But again, want to say thank you to everybody for being here. It was a good discussion. We have a lot of work to do, and we need to accomplish and figure out a plan going forward with a short-term plan and a long-term plan, so residents feel that their quality of life is not impacted negatively by electronic billboards. Having said that, this meeting is adjourned, and looking forward to the working session over the next 30 days or so. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good job, Ford. Send me that PowerPoint.
Sure will. Thanks very much. Yeah, very nice to talk to you. I'll get that over to you right now.
Thank you, Ford.
Cheers. Bye-bye.